Hello and welcome back. As you might be able to guess, we are, well, especially based on the title, we are going to be doing a tier list for the late game industrial techs. Now, for this, it's going to be, fairly conversational. We're going to do it in one take, and so, you might want to put this on in the background while you play, but this is kind of our way of overviewing the techs now that we have passed, 1.5 as part of our Victoria 3 tutorial series. Now, for all these, it is important to keep in mind that for our rankings, S through D, this is all on the basis primarily of prioritization, not power level, since you will be expected to get kind of all the techs in the game, or very nearly all the techs, and so it's not a matter of, if you are getting the tech, it's a matter of when you're getting the tech, and so the question is, how likely are we to rush these techs? And also, we are entering the late game, and as you enter the late game, if we just kind of come into game, as you enter the late game in the early game, you do not want to incur this malice that you get for being ahead of time on research, generally speaking. So if we hover shift work, we will see that it costs an enormous amount of research, 40,000. 28,000 of that is coming from being unresearched from earlier eras, and 12.5 is coming from the base research. And we talked about this kind of extensively in the research video, but the basic idea is that the benefits of research increase exponentially because if you have, 50 coal mines, a coal PM is not going to be as useful as if you had 200 coal mines, but the cost of innovation scales linearly. Adding one university, now you can get additional throughput, but other than the throughput, adding additional innovation is going to cost the same amount, except for the diminishing returns you get for sinking innovation into natural spread, which is a secondary thing, is you can get extra innovation over your direct research amount, that is your research cap, the soft cap, in the form of, natural spread, but this has to be text that other people have researched. So all that combined means that in the early game, you don't suffer this malice, or you try and avoid these malices, and in the late game, you actively try and suffer these malices because tech spread can pick up the chaff. And so what this means for us is, when we come back to kind of this sort of tier list, the late game tier list, we are trying really hard to make it much more polarized than before, with the idea that you are going to actually want to be researching stuff ahead of time really aggressively, that way you don't suffer the malice. And because this is the strategy, this means that the middling techs all get really heavily deprioritized, and instead it becomes a matter of, either these S tier techs, or most other things are going to get relegated to C and D, and this is going to be kind of how we are looking at things and evaluating techs in general, as part of our tech strategy. But we're going to be talking about each individual tech, probably going through in a linear fashion, except for we might group all the electricity ones together, because electricity is also a little bit of a difficult one to suss out. We also, with these late game techs, haven't played too many super deep runs, so I'm less confident with my late game rankings. But with electricity specifically, there's a lot of strangeness as a result of the queue overbuilding them, electricity also just being a terrible PM, and also costing a lot of construction. And so the power plants cost 800 construction, the PMs aren't that good, especially the first PM, and so this is going to cause some problems. Also, shout out to the spreadsheet. Sorry that didn't remind you that you need to hide your children before you look at it. Now, so let's just get into it now. So we're going to start out with threshing machines. Now, the threshing machines PM is not that good as a labor-saving PM. It's not going to be, it's not going to be very, very efficient in terms of cost per 100, worker reduced. And for most countries, if you are running out of labor, you're not going to want to have, or you're not going to have your pops employed in grain areas anyways. And so threshing machine, while not like a super terrible tech, because you will use the PMs, it's not something you would ever actively research, except for maybe specifically like Japan and Korea. The reason being is that you have to be running out of pops to really want to use this, because if you have a bunch of peasants, you'd rather they just stay employed for the most part, or this is such a non-prioritization that it's not going to be a big deal. And I think you would also particularly want to be really heavily invested in grain, and the only ones who can do that are countries with rice. And so you specifically need to be playing a rice country that is not going to run out of too many pops and is also going to be pushing rice, so it's going to have a medium-high amount of pops. And so it's going to be, S through D tier. We're just going to put it in C tier here, with the idea that it's going to go pretty far at the back of C tier. Well, actually, everything's going to feel pretty far in the back of C tier. It's a labor-saving PM. If you're needing to save labor, you're probably not building grain, or you're probably not trying to build grain unless you have rice, and it's just not going to look that good. Pump jacks is incredible. The pump jacks PM is insane. If we come back into the spreadsheet here and we actually take a look at the agricultural stuff, what the pump jacks PM does is it basically doubles your output. When you go from basic production to automatic irrigation, it basically doubles your output. It's an insane PM, and so if you are invested at all, in agricultural sectors, it's absolutely insane. But it is contingent upon that investment. And so there will be a lot of countries where you manage to be like full industrial, you don't really have very many plantations, where it doesn't look that good, and your ability to discover oil and build oil is not useful until you actually have a need for it. And so pump jacks is going to be a little strange because it's going to be an absolute slam dunk. I get this immediately. I rush towards it. I research the prerequisite text required to get pump jacks. I come in and I do dynamite and steam donkey. I prep these just so I can get into pump jacks. You're going to be looking at a lot of countries that look like that, and also a lot of countries that just don't really care that much because they don't have a lot of the stuff. So we're going to put pump jacks in A tier, which is a very, very strong A tier, where it's bifurcated, where it's either S tier or it's C tier. Okay. And now we come to electrical generation, which is actually the hardest one for me to take a look at. Now, electrical generation itself doesn't really give all that much, but what it does, one of the PMs that it does give is absolutely insane. And that's electric streetlights is an insanely strong PM. It gives infrastructure, and it gives a ton of services per electricity. It's really, really, really strong. However, and electricity, my evaluation on this is still, it's difficult to say because your auto queue will go ballistic with electricity still. Sometimes your auto queue will just build up nearly infinite ones of these, and these is just a bad thing. Also, you cannot build some electricity, and you see here, this is going to give an electricity of it's going to ask for 3. Well, the electrical plant, the power plant, if we can hover it here, is going to generate 50 electricity. So this means you're only going to be able to put it in places, for the purposes of turning on streetlights, right? You're only going to be able to put it with places that have 17 plus urbanization, which is not really necessarily going to be too many places, right? And so it's not really... it's awkward to implement. Sawmills is also good, but you're not going to want to invest, 800 construction in order to improve the PMs on, 5, 6, 8 logging camps specifically, or it's not going to feel absolutely spectacular. It's still an extremely strong PM, and these are the 2 to write home about. But I think that electricity in general, you want to research all together. And because electrical generation is the tier 3 tech, and all the other good electricity PMs, which are electrical capacitors, steam turbine, and electric railways, all these are tier 4 techs. I actually think this is heavily deprioritized now, especially in this post 1.5 world. Not to mention the bugginess of the auto queue just going ballistic. I think that in general, you want to hold off on researching electrical generation until you are in a position where you're going to want to go for all 4 of these, or electrical generation and capacitors, or electrical generation and steam turbine and capacitors, something to this effect. And so as a consequence, we're going to actually rate this pretty low. We're going to put it in C tier, but with some weird heavy asterisks in that, these other techs become really good. Brine electrolysis is one of the very best techs in the game, and we'll talk about that more once we get to capacitors and electric railways and steam turbine. The base PM for electricity is really, really bad though. So we'll jump back into the browser and we will put it in C tier here. Okay. We are going to put it in C tier, but it's going to be ahead of threshing machines. There's situations where you want it. Aniline unlocks synthetic plants, and aniline is one that's kind of hard to discuss, generally speaking, because, so it's going to be situationally pretty good. If you are a country that has sulfur that does not have access to dyes, and you need to secure dyes in some sort of effect like this, but this is kind of narrow. We're going to put it in C tier with, sometimes it'll perform in a B or A slot if you are playing like specifically like these, like two Sicilies basically. If you have Sicily, and this is a large portion of your economy, the state of Sicily, then I think Anatolian's pretty good. Or if you're playing, I guess maybe Peru, Bolivia, but I think they have access to just be able to build the dice plantations themselves, and they're probably going to go pump jacks because they're going to have rubber there. So I think you would prefer to go pump jacks and rubber, pump jacks and produce dye yourself, if I'm not mistaken. So kind of a narrow band of things, but the synthetics plants are okay. They're not that great. If we take a look, they're going to produce efficiency per week of construction of 32 and per 100 workers of 28. If we compare that to pump jacks on dye plantations on automatic irrigation, it's somewhat commensurate with efficiency per worker. It's actually a little bit worse, but it's way more efficient to put in dye plantations. The only thing is you're creating these buy orders for sulfur, and sulfur is one of the best industries in the entire game. And so, allow me to rephrase that. Sulfur is the best industry in the entire game. The problem is you often don't really get to create demand for sulfur, and so that it is creating demand for sulfur is substantive. But does this make it something like a tech that you actively want to research? Not really, except in very narrow cases where you have a place that has cotton and like you're building for MAPI and like this is a majority of your economy, and so it's super narrow. Next up is Vulcanization. Now, to be fair, if you've seen some of my more recent tutorials, we made a mistake in putting in the PMs, but Vulcanization does unlock machine steel tools, which is probably the best industry in the game, not the best like resource thing, which is going to go to sulfur and gold, but the best it's the best manufacturing industry in the game. It doesn't have the best overall net output and this type of thing. There's a lot of other things that show it up, or a few other things like glassworks on bone china. But the problem is you will collapse the price of ceramics if you have this PM fully turned on, and then it also requires lead, which can sometimes run a shortage. These ones are pretty good, the boom booms, but the arms industries are really good, but there's not going to be a lot of demand. Same for artillery and same for shipyards. And so overall, this is probably the best PM in the game. And it's also, if we take a look, machine steel, both in terms of efficiency per construction and per 100 workers, it's so much better than the previous one. It's almost twice as good. And so if you have access to rubber, this is an absolute slam dunk. You have to research it as quickly as possible. And so that's it's absolutely insane, because the tools are absolutely insane. I'm somewhat inclined to maybe put it into A tier just because there's the contingency on the fact that you need rubber. But I think that the way the metagame has evolved is you should securing rubber just so you can get this tech, I think, is a significant play pattern. And so saying the contingency you need to have rubber, if you don't have rubber by the time you go Vulcanization, you've probably misplayed, or you're playing RP or something like this, in which case if you're having fun you're winning. So we're going to put it there. Nitrogen fixation is a tech that you can research. We're going to put it in D tier. The reason being is the tech is, let's jump into game real quick and just take a closer look at nitrogen fixation. The tech is going to unlock it's going to be the last farming tech, but you really have to be specifically playing some sort of rice focused thing, where you're going to really, really value the new farming thing, because nitrogen fixation process is not a PM you really use. 20 oil per level is not something you're interested in, because generally speaking, you have to be stingy with what oil PMs you turn on, and that's not going to be one you want to turn on. And then we get chemical fertilizers, which will have a ton of grain, but it'll also really price dump the grain a lot when you turn it on. And so you need a very specific circumstance, you are specifically pushing up a ton of rice for the purposes of increasing your credit line or something, and then this is just going to help you increase your credit line faster so you can deficit spend harder. I mean, if you have a ton of rice farms and you're exporting to everyone, maybe this is something, but like I think that overall it's not going to be one that you're ever really rushing, which isn't to say that the PM's bad. Like we like the chemical fertilizers, but the fact that you have to give up a moving ahead of time on something else in order to get this makes it just very, very suspect. I don't think I can't remember the last time I've actively researched this and thought it was good to actively research, and so that's kind of why we're putting it in D tier. And so on to the next one. We have mechanized workshops. Tractors is going to be a really good labor-saving PM. It's significantly better than threshing machines, but mechanized workshops is unfortunately going to be competing with a lot of other techs. If we come back in, mech workshops is going to be competing kind of with a lot of other techs in terms of when you unlock it. You gain access to like threshing machines a little bit earlier, but by the time you have access to mech workshops, you're probably off doing something else. And so you're like, I think that, intensive wool gathering is, if I recall correctly, it's actually not even more efficient than the previous one. It's just a different makeup. And then the tractors are good, but just like the same logic of threshing machine, they're not good enough for this to like warrant an active research pretty much ever. You'd rather just let this one natural spread. Mechanized slaughterhouses is good, but like the meat industry is like one of the worst industries in the game, so you're not trying to have a lot of these. And so if you don't have a lot of them, they're not going to be very good. So we're going to put it in D tier. Kind of, and you'll notice like a common theme. They're probably probably behind. Very common thing. There's going to be a lot of C and D tier things here. Electric arc process. Now, electric arc process is not a terrible PM. This is on the steel. But you're not going to want to ever research it before you have, a bunch of electricity available. Sorry, it's going to be on the steel, if I recall correctly. And it's going to make the steel a little bit more efficient, but this is not an enormous come up. Moving from, a net value added from 1,500 to 1,700 is not the biggest. And it requires an input of a highly inefficient industry in that, generally speaking, the power plants are not that good looking themselves, and so that you are adding kind of this need for energy. Like if you already have the energy, you'd want to turn it on, I think, at least if you're on coal and like this, but you're never going to research it. I don't think you research this one actively, and so we're going to also put it in D tier. We're going to put it behind both of these, I think. Next up, we have plastics. Now, plastics has a really interesting role in as far as the techs go, because this is probably the best oil sink that you can research early on when you start getting access to oil. The oil industries, to come back in, are very, very, very efficient. The oil rigs are really good, and one of the problems you have when you first get the oil industries is that they are going to be there's not going to be demand for oil, and so this is going to be really good. And also, plastics is going to be the better part of, if we come back into industrial goods, it's going to be the better part of, producing a lot more glass is going to be really good for making these industries a lot better on, the glass works, especially because this is a construction good. Generally, glass can get extremely expensive. And this is also part of why ceramics and porcelain normally collapses in price, because you generally have disproportionately high amount of glassworks relative to your other luxury good industries of clothing and furniture. And so we are going to put plastics, though. We're going to put this in the top of B tier, which is that it's going to be conditionally useful, conditionally very strong. If you need an oil sink, this is going to be something you're really, really interested in, because it will make both your glassworks way better and also make your oil industries way better. Pneumatic tools got a little bit of a facelift. It's still not incredibly good, but we're going to put it in C tier. Increases, it effectively can save you 2% on construction by improving your MAPI, by giving you more throughput on your construction sectors. It also gives resource discovery chance, and the resource discovery chance might be kind of the more significant part. It's really hard to say, but the thing about pneumatic tools is it's never bad, and so if you're trying to clear out, that current tier of research, it is something that is worth doing. And so we're gonna put pneumatic tools in. It's basically never bad, and so that's kind of the endorsement, which is, I know, not the most glowing endorsement, but we're gonna put it in C tier. just behind electrical generation. Next up, we have steam turbines. And steam turbines, electrical capacitors, and electric railways, I think we're going to discuss all of these together. And so we're going to jump back into game for a moment and take a look at these texts, because I think we need to discuss all of these together. So, steam turbine is going to unlock coal-fired power plant, which is way better. You take extra coal in, basically, and you basically double the amount of electricity output, I think. I think the base one has, an output of 50, and so this is going to make them way, way better at turning on PMs. Yeah, this base is 50, and so this is going to make you way better at turning on PMs. It's way more efficient, and so very often, the first PM for electricity feels terrible, and you can even run shortages and still not be able to employ up. And so that it's unlocking really good PMs in the form of electrical streetlights and sawmills is undermined by the fact that if your logging camps and your urban centers have to run throughput malices in order to turn on the PMs, suddenly it's not useful at all. This will generally get it to the point where you're not going to be running, you're not going to have buildings that can't employ up even when you're running a shortage on steam turbine. And so this is going to be important. Electrical capacitors has some of the very best PMs in the game, and also very critically, electric sewing machines is going to be really good on two fronts. One, the price dump on clothes is generally going to really positively affect SOL because pops consume a lot of clothes. But also, this is one of the best labor-saving PMs in the game. The automatic power looms. It's just straight up extremely good. And then brine electrolysis takes the explosives industries to like a whole nother level. So all of these being combined on one thing is just really, really, really strong. And last, we have electric railways, where we have two really strong labor-saving PMs. Refrigerated rail cars making kind of invalidating one of these over here. I think it's the pasteurization is kind of effectively invalidated by refrigerated rail cars because they have, you'd rather research this one because it has the better PM. Electrical trains is going to be good. When you turn on electrical trains, these industries are also really bad, the railroad industries, and so turning on this takes it to another level. Also, this is a huge upgrade for the motor industries, and so all of this together is a really, really nice package. And so when I think you've kind of gotten into a spot where you don't really have any good military tech on the immediate horizon to research or society tech, just going for all four of these together, I think is a really strong strategy. But that said, right now, electricity is a pain to micromanage. It makes going this feel bad. I dread going electricity, and so this might kind of inform to some degree some of my opinions on this. But we'll jump back into the browser and we will kind of put these in. Or actually, let's just take a quick look at some of the PMs. The steam turbines is going to give the next level on the power plants, which is going to jump it up quite a bit from a net of 900 to 1200, but very importantly, the stuff it's creating excess or more orders for creates a little bit more orders for engines, but it creates a lot more orders for coal. And so this is going to be, in terms of its input profile, coal is a really nice input relative to just engines. One of the reasons why this place can't be profitable is because if you have an industry with really, really low price flexibility, the industry will tend to be expensive. And what you have is, this is the case when you go with, motor industries. They have a pretty low price flexibility, and so generally speaking, motor industries will trend high, but then the input for motor industries is steel, which also has a really low input efficiency, so there's going to be a compounding effect. Steel will tend to always be a little bit expensive or quite expensive. Motors will tend to be even more expensive, and then the third one down the road, being the initial, first level of power plants, it's going to be extraordinarily inefficient, it's going to be very inefficient because you could expect your input goods to be significantly more expensive than they appear here. It's going to cost a lot more than 600 because you will almost never have base motor prices, and so that's one of the reasons this has a lot of trouble employing up. It's so much better than just doubling the input of the engines and the output of the electricity. Instead, it is an extra 50% input on the engines, but then the rest is made up in coal, which is really efficient in terms of price flexibility. And so the price of coal will generally be lower than the price of engines, which can make these actually employ up so you don't run a shortage and you can turn on the very good electricity PMs. Coming into, let's put steam turbine in kind of the top of C tier, with the understanding that we're likely to go electricity into steam turbine. So we're not going to wrestle electricity as much, and kind of almost want to put steam turbine in B tier. But I think you kind of research these all together maybe. But I think that the ones that are going to stand out more is if we get electrical generation and then we get steam turbine, what it's really doing is it's allowing us to turn on the lighting or the lighting in the urban centers, which, by the way, is an insane PM in terms of what it's going to do. It requires a little bit more labor, but it gives you a ton of output per labor. It gives you a ton of net value added per laborer, and so this is going to be quite strong. And it also gives you more infrastructure, which means you have to build less railways, which are terrible. And so it's hard to quantify how good this is. And so we're going to put. And then electrical capacitors, brine electrolysis being kind of the best PM in there. The explosives just absolutely enormous come up, more than double the efficiency, moving from vacuum evaporation to brine electrolysis. And so this is going to be a pretty big deal. Actually, so one of the things that's a sneaky thing is that it also requires a lot less workers. But this it's almost so efficient that it makes me feel like maybe I input something incorrectly, but I don't think I did. So we're going to put electrical capacitors up here in B tier, and then we are going to come over to the electric railways, and we're going to put electric railways. I mean, I think that you research capacitors before railways pretty much no matter what. I think we're going to put electrical railways behind steam turbines, with the understanding that I think you will often go electrical generation into capacitors because capacitors is so good, and because you don't even have much electricity set up, and so you're kind of just going to be building your first few, getting the major urban areas up and going, and so you will be able to turn on these other PMs even if the electricity is really, really bad, to some degree, because the PMs are so good. And so I think you go electrical generation into steam turbines, or into capacitors into steam turbines into electric railways. As a matter of practice, it might be electrical generation into steam turbine, but the point is you're delaying electrical generation, and you're not prioritizing it really highly, and you're even delaying these three until after you get electrical generation initially. And now we have the elephant in the room, combustion engine, which I think I could be mistaken about cars. I could be. I don't think I am. But I think that the motor industries is one of the worst PMs in the game. Automobiles, the problem is it adds 1,500 workers, and it only adds 100 net value. And so adding 1,500 workers and only adding 100 net value, it really tanks the PM. If we take a look here, and we fixed this, we had this wrong before, because it wasn't calculating the rubber. Anyways, if we take a look at electrical cars on electric engines, which are going to be common because diesel requires a ton of oil, and you generally don't turn this on. So cars on electric engines, rotary valve engine, and automobiles have a net output per construction of 37, per worker of 32.6. That just looks a lot worse than electric engines. And so the thing is the PM just gets a lot worse. It always looks wildly profitable, but you have to keep in mind that it's taking up a whole ton of extra workers as well. And these workers could have been working in other industries. And I'm inclined to think that this is a trap, and that you should never turn on an automobile industry in your country at all. That way your pops don't have demand for cars, and they instead consume transportation. Now, the only kind of counter to this, in my opinion, is that maybe the railway PMs are so bad at producing transportation that this is just kind of a bit of a win, because it takes the pressure off of them. But you kind of want transportation to be really expensive without running a shortage, because this means that you have to pay less out in subsidies, which this is kind of a really large thing to unpack and maybe take a closer look at regarding the auto industries specifically, but I think they're really bad. And what this effectively gives you is it gives you the second PM for the oil. In my opinion, this is all it gives you, because I don't think you want to use any of the other stuff because it's so bad. And so what it will do is it will give you the second PM for the oil, which admittedly is quite strong on combustion. but I don't think it's worth it. So I think that this is, I mean, so if you're playing multiplayer, maybe you want the cars, and maybe you want to use the cars for military, but I'm thinking you don't even want to use the cars for military. I'm going to put this at the top of D tier, and yeah, I don't feel good about it at all. I think the PM's really bad. And this is one people disagree with me on a lot, so I think it's possible I'm incorrect, but I haven't seen a bit of an analysis or an argument as to why, got some wee-woos outside, but as to why why the good PM, like, people just say the thing is so profitable, but you can't compare, like, it's artificially forcing the price of automobiles up because there's a minimum demand once demand is created, and so it looks really profitable, but it's eating the profit of the railway industries, which already suck, and it's also it's also looking really profitable per building, but it's also adding 1,500 workers, and so yeah, but cars will often be plus 75, so this isn't the full story in terms of the added output. Anyways, a bit of a digression. I think that the PM's really bad, though. Okay, for telephones, often I kind of think, coming back into game for a moment, I often think of the telephone PM is one that you don't ever research until you natural spread central planning, or you natural spread telephones and then you research central planning. I think you kind of just let one natural spread and then you get the other one. Some counterexamples might be if you're playing Ching or you have a really high amount of pops, or you're trying to go command economy, I guess. Getting telephones earlier is going to be good, but I think telephones just very situational, and you generally want to kind of have one half of the two already, because telephones turn on a PM in government administrations, that's good, but you need central planning, so we're going to put telephone in C tier, which is that it's going to be conditionally good. We're going to put it behind, I want to put it around aniline. Maybe we'll put it ahead of aniline. Conveyor belts, or I forget what this is called, the ones that unlock the automation on the conveyor belts, though. I think that generally you don't want to spend your oil this way. I think if you acquire a ton of oil, though, there might be situations where this nat spreads to you, you turn the PM on. But I think we're not ever actively researching this, or actively researching this very rarely. We're going to put it behind nitrogen fixation process, with the understanding that we're just really not going to use the rail, or we're not going to use these PMs very often. Like if we come over here, like the assembly line, the problem with the assembly line is that it uses a ton of oil. And it's like, okay, some of these are more efficient than others. But, okay, like coming up to the tooling workshops, I think the tooling workshops has the most efficient assembly line. It's going to use 10 oil. And so if you get crimped on oil, it's not doable. But if you have really cheap oil, well, it's doable. But, like, if you're actively researching, looking for a sink for your oil, plastics is going to be better. Like, we could jump into game real quick and take a look. But if you're actively researching, right, and you need something for oil, you need an input for oil, you could go conveyors. Sure, conveyors doesn't really, it leads to some of the automation PMs, which we're going to talk to in a little bit. But I think that you'd be better off like going ahead of time towards compression ignition, which we'll talk to in a little bit. But as far as the tier 4 goes, you just go plastics. And this is, I think, how you handle it. I think it'd be even better to go perhaps nitrogen fixation, with the idea, which like feels kind of bad, but with the idea that if it's really, really cheap, you can use nitrogen fixation process, but that this other part, the chemical ferts, is going to be pretty good, especially because decreasing the price of grain, if you have a lot of pops that are lower SOL, this will actually positively affect your SOL like a little bit, but yeah. I don't think I don't rate it too highly. And so we are going to put it where we had put it, which is behind nitrogen fixation process. I think if you're looking for, I think you don't research D-tier techs actively basically ever, but I think if you were going to research one, you probably do fixation before the conveyor belts. Barring some really extreme situations where you're trying to build extremely tall in like one state or something like this, and you're importing oil from the AI. And maybe this changes with spheres of influence, where the AI actually produces oil, and this is maybe something doable, but okay. Art Silks. This is the only PM in the game that has negative efficiency, as far as I can recall, but it does. And so when you turn on Rayon, the input goods are actually more expensive than the output goods. And so it like requires X amount of wood, and then, yeah, so this PM's bad. And so I think you avoid activating this PM at all costs, pretty much. So like even if you have it available, you don't turn it on. And so we're going to put this back here. Automatic bottle blowers. It's a labor-saving PM. It requires more oil than we would like. Which, well, to be fair, anything above 0 is kind of more than we would like. But it is for the industrial goods. Let's take a look. It is for the glassworks, but it will require bottle blowers. 25 oil, which is a lot of oil compared to something like assembly lines, right? And so if bottle blowers is going to be a lot less efficient per worker saved, and so we're going to put it just ahead of Art Silk here. Radio is going to be very contingent. I think you don't actively want to research radio just to unlock the good, so much as you are going to often want to research radio specifically when you are going on to the later, I forget the name of it, but the military PM. Squad infantry, I think, requires it. I don't think trench works requires it. I could be mistaken. I don't think trench infantry requires the input of radios, but you are going to need it for squad infantry. And so you're going to often want to research ahead of time to unlock squad infantry, but it does require radio, and so generally speaking, it's better to research, if you're planning on doing squad, it's better to research radio first, or get whatever the baseline progress for squad is, which is 17,500, put that much into squad, and then switch back to radio, and do radio in the meantime, something like this. And so I think it's going to be one that you will situationally go for, and so we're going to put it in C tier, which is kind of the situationally good tier, but often not super, super good. We're going to put it just behind pneumatic tools, and maybe this is a little bit misplaced because squad infantry. Also, if you're playing in multiplayer, everything changes a lot. In that, military becomes a lot more important, and so radios become a lot more important. Also, cars do have a value in multiplayer in that you can dump them to other people's markets. Pasteurization kind of sucks because the electric railway process is going to be, or the electricity one's going to be a little bit better, but I think pasteurization requires electricity anyways, actually. I'm not 100% sure, but this PM's generally not that good. We're going to put it behind conveyor belts. Actually, let's put it behind mech infantry. Dough rollers is a really good PM. Unfortunately, now we're in the tier 5 PMs. And so, like, if we come back in, there's not really that many tier 5 industrial techs. We have arc welding. We have just the 5 here, right? We have arc welding, oil turbine, combustion ignition, flash freezing, and dough rollers. And as far as prioritization goes, when you get into the tier 5s, for the most part, 4 out of 5 of these are just really not going to push the needle in terms of wanting to emphasize it or research it quickly. And also, military tech is kind of the reigns supreme over prioritization importance in terms of the late game, and so anything tier 5 has to be considered within that context. And it's not that dough rollers sucks, but it's that you are going to want to research a lot of military PMs, also macroeconomics, antibiotics, and other stuff a lot more aggressively than you would kind of most of these, with one exception. And so it's going to really kind of suffer from its positioning here. It's actually one of the best labor-saving PMs in the game. They get 10 tools to minus 2,500 laborers, which is going to be really good. But it's just at a phase in the game where you're just never going to prioritize it, I think. I think this is in the never actively researched tier, but pretty high in the negative never actively researched tier. We're going to put it up here. I mean, maybe compression ignition. I would bite that maybe it's in C tier. I think the PM's really trappy though, and I think that it's easy to think it's like a lot better than it is. Flash freezing is going to be pretty solid in terms of the PM, but it is going to suffer from the fact that it is tier 5. The PM's pretty good. It's tier 5. I think that out of all of the tier 5s but one, flash freezing might be my favorite. Let's kind of jump in game and take a quick look at it. The PMs are disgustingly good at labor saving, but they don't apply to as much as you would like. It's for livestock ranches, which isn't a very good industry, and for fishing wharves and whaling stations, which are going to be limited in number. And so on paper, it looks extremely good, but we're gonna, I mean, automated bakery, like this might save more labor overall, even though the PM's probably not as good, just because you'll have more of these industries by the time you reach this phase in the game, and you're gated by the amount of fishing and whaling you can have, and you'd rather not focus livestock at all, if possible. So it's kind of a little bit tough, but we're going to put flash freezing in D. I think we're going to put it ahead of dough rollers, though. I do think it's probably a little bit better. I don't know. It's gonna depend. You'll probably take a look at how many food industries you have versus how many of this other stuff you have. I guess dough rollers is easier to turn on everywhere, and so maybe we do it. Which brings us to compression ignition. This is the best. So the compression ignition unlocks the final tier for all the mines, and it is a huge jump. It's a very large jump from condensing engine pump to diesel pump. These are some of the best industries in the game. They'll generally occupy an enormous amount of your workforce and the construction you invested in stuff. And these PMs are absurd, and they create demand. They're the best oil sink in the game. They only use 5 oil. You definitely want to turn them on. And they support all of the really important industries. They make construction downstream the equilibriums for all the construction prices way cheaper. This PM not even looking at the other stuff, just the compression ignition PM or the diesel pump alone is just absolutely absurd PM. We're going to put compression ignition at S tier ahead of vulcanization. This is the most rushable tech, or this is one of the really rushable tier 5 techs. And it is the only rushable tier 5 tech in the industry. And so it's going to be very, very strong. Coming in, let's actually just look at it in game as well. Real quick, but it's hard to overemphasize how good it is. This is the main attraction, though, is just this enormous increase in output on these things. It requires just a little bit more oil, and then it's taking tools, which is like a really nice input to have because the tooling industries are really efficient, and it's going to be very, very strong. And you can export all these mineral ores really, really aggressively because the PM's going to be so good. I think diesel trains is a little bit trappy, and you don't want to use it because it uses a pretty high amount of oil. And then compression ignition tractors, I think you don't use because the oil, but you could use them if you really, really wanted to, except in rice where it's not allowed. And diesel engine, if you take a look, 50 oil per level. I don't think it's worth using as a consequence of this, which is why electric engines, I think, are more the way to go. And so, yeah. Coming in on oil turbine, which is going to be the next one we take a look at, this produces, another 50 electricity up from 100 to 150, but it requires 40 oil. So if you're somehow swimming in oil, which you probably shouldn't be in this point in the game, then maybe it'd be okay. But barring that, this PM's one I think you don't even turn on most of the time. Maybe there's some sort of mappy argument for turning it on where you specifically have oil, but I don't think it's there. I think the PM's probably not good enough. And so we're going to put oil turbine in. It's going to go in D tier, and just the only question is where D tier is it going? I think probably after electric arc process, because these are the ones to the right here. These are all PMs I think you don't use, and I think you use the PMs to the left. And then we have arc welding, which is a bit of an interesting one. So arc welding suffers a lot from being in, the tier 5 techs. Otherwise, arc welding would actually be pretty good because it's much more efficient. Geez, we haven't used this tab in forever, but it's going to be a lot more efficient. The goods price the goods price per construction goes up, but the wage multiplier goes down, if I recall correctly. Maybe it's not as good as we think, or it's going to be more efficient. I have to take a closer look at arc welding, to be honest. But independent of the arc welding construction, which I think is worth using, I think you turn it on, but also if you don't turn it on, it's kind of whatever, because generally you're at a point in the game when you're researching arc welding that a lot of stuff's starting to not really matter anymore. But coming back into the industrial goods, The steamships, the arc steel steamships, the arc welded, as well as the capital ships, are a pretty substantive upgrade, and this won't be a lot of your construction, or at least on the shipyards it is. This won't be a lot of your construction overall invested into these shipyards, but the PMs are pretty good, and so I kind of think that if you are going to be in a situation where you are researching a tier 5 industrial tech and you have the choice between, and you've already researched compression ignition obviously, and your choice is between this one and the other four, you probably research this one, and so we're going to put it at the back of C tier, and you will see kind of as we have finished up this tier list, we have a situation where it is going to be very, very weighted towards the bottom. And this is largely because you are researching stuff ahead of time. And so a lot of times, before these kind of tier 4 conditional type techs that we're researching, like radio and telephone and aniline and threshing and arc welding, like these kind of back end ones, it's worth it to go for compression ignition first. Because you're paying non-linearly, you're paying linear prices for your tech, and you need to research ahead of time to make sure you're natural spreading to actually make use of your natural spread investment, and so you'd rather just let these natch spread to you and get compression ignition just a little bit faster, and there's more value in this, and so these are going to be kind of the ones you rush, and then these are going to be the ones that you're okay letting them natch spread to you, generally speaking, and maybe we should even put the electrical stuff a little bit higher. It's all kind of floating around in the B, C, kind of thing, but just to kind of go down through it really quick. Compression, ignition, and vulcanization are really the insane ones. Pump jacks is conditionally insane if you have, if you have the economy that has a lot of plantations. Hardware plastics, good for developing demand for oil, but you need to already have oil kind of somewhat developed or a lot of it discovered for plastics to really be useful. And then we have the squad of the 4 electrical checks, which are not going to be electricity. I think is just not very good until you get capacitors plus steam turbine, and then once you have electrical generation and steam turbine, then I think electric railroads is insane. And so you kind of just research this block of 4 together, and then everything else is either situational or just you never research it, with the D tier being never actively researched, and the controversial one perhaps being compression engine. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this tier list, as well as just kind of a discussion about the technology. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, do the YouTube algorithm thing, and have a good day.